Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Jim Cornette Experience. And today on the Cultcast, we're going to talk about whatever the fuck I want to talk about because it's my fucking show. But we do have questions from the cult of Cornette and some inside wrestling knowledge that should spark spirited verbal intercourse with my co-host and cohort. He is Hawaiian Brian, the podcasting lion, the king of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, Mr. Co-host to you, Swammy's Pappy, the post office playboy, Susie's favorite boy, her favorite package to deliver, the operator and manipulator of the French Toast Chateau, your friend and mine, the great New Jersey nincompoop, Brian Lass.
Aloha, Jim. A pleasure to be here once again. Let me just stress, I've done this before. I'm a New Yorker, but I live in New Jersey.
Well, so you're a refugee or some type of cast-off person who's, like the boat lift people. You managed to cross over.
Yes.
State lines, and now you're safe.
Exactly, like the people on the Mariel boat lift in Cuba. Yes, that's exactly what I'm like. Yes.
You know what? I decided something today, just this morning when I got up and I looked at my list, because I got the OCD and I always have lists. And I decided today, no more Mr. Nice Guy for Jim Cornette. Now, I know what you're saying. I'm noted for being compassionate and caring and careful with people's feelings, but no more of this. Because I've got to think of myself first at some point in my life, right? Because like I say, I got the OCD and I'm always concerned that that's why I obsess over things. I'm concerned I'm missing a detail or I'm forgetting something. So I make a lot of lists. I do a lot of paper. I surround myself with papers and lists and things of things that need to be done. Details need to be addressed, especially now I'm running this multimedia empire, Cornette's Collectibles, the podcast, the live experiences, the midnight reunions, the writing projects, the books, the restraining orders, all these things that I'm into. And I'm always stressed because I'm always behind. Did you ever get that feeling? You're just always behind with something. You've promised to do something. You're obligated to do. You're getting paid to do something. Some of these people actually give me money. and I'm always I make a list of stuff I need to do every day. And I never get it all done, so that stuff transforms to the next day, right? And the stuff that isn't on fire then gets put off until finally I've made sub lists. I've like a list, well, these are the people that I haven't called in fucking forever. And I got to make a list of the emails because I can't carry my fucking computer around in my goddamn pocket. So I got to make a list of the emails that I need to respond to when I get back on the computer, but then I'm a slow typist. So that sometimes goes sideways. And then the sub lists get crazy because sometimes if I make a list of things to do over the weekend, if I want to say do something relaxing, like cleaning the TV room, cleaning is very relaxing to me. Well, then I make a sub list of everything I need to do to clean the TV room. I need to vacuum, dust, Windex tabletops, blah, blah, blah. And I have a sub list there. So I'm spending a lot of my time crossing lists off, not just of things for me, but for things of all the other people in the world that I deal with that I promise things to, or I'm obligated to do something, or even I feel bad about not getting back to them. But damn it all to hell, it's time I took time for myself. So if I haven't answered them in the last 3 months, then 4 more days isn't going to hurt. So I'm taking a couple of days. I almost get emotional when I think about this. I'm taking a couple of days just for me. I'm going to go get me a new pair of glasses. Haven't done that in 5 or 6 years. I can barely see the fucking nose in front of my face. I'm going to shampoo that carpet in the TV room that I spoke of just previously. I'm going to do some things for myself. I'm going to pamper myself. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm going to put me first and not feel guilty about not getting back to all these people or doing all these things that I'm committed to doing.
Harley Quinn, does she shit on the rug, or the carpet that you're going to be shampooing?
Not anymore. There was a period of time early in her life when she gambled to gain and she carried a knife. No, I'm doing Black Oak, Arkansas now. There was a time early in her life when she would poo-poo especially in the TV room in a couple of different places. And she poo-pooed in the office here a little bit also. But But that's been a while. She now poo-poos outside like a big girl.
That's good.
But anyway, I'm telling you, and also I mentioned on the drive-through, I think it was as well. The Ford Focus could be the Ford Fuck You, but no, things have been rectified. Wally Branson and the whole Ford service staff over there at Paul Miller Ford in Lexington. I don't know why they don't make the Ford cars instead of in Detroit or wherever they make them these days, Japan, New Zealand, Swaziland, wherever. They should make them at Paul Miller Ford because Wally and his guys put them back together better than they make them originally. So I appreciate it. If you go in and see Wally in Lexington at Paul Miller Ford, tell him that Jim Cornette said he does a wonderful job putting cars back together. Homie, I'll tell you one thing I'm not going to slack off on this week, though, Brian, my boy. See, I'm trying to be up-tempo here, and you're just letting me ramble. I'm trying to be positive here. I'm not going to slack off on fulfilling the commitment to my fans that order at Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com because, have you heard about this? Have you read about this? The American Cancer Society donations are just going up exponentially.
Yeah.
Over the, yeah, well, there you just don't dominate the whole conversation. Well, no, I tweeted about this, but I wanted to let everybody know. And of course, if you've been listening over the past few weeks, Bob Eaton, Dennis Condrey, and I, at our reunion in Nashville, signed a limited number of color 8x10s of us 35 years ago. And they are on sale at jimcornette.com. You just click on collectibles. They're right the first picture in the 8x10 section. But $5 of every sale or every photo goes to the American Cancer Society in honor of Dennis kicking cancer's ass. And then obviously also the Midnighter sharing in these proceeds, Dennis and Bobby both. And Dennis said thank you to everybody because he's got 5 or 6 doctors that are dependents on him now. But anyway, so the Midnight picture that's on sale, we sold 65 of them for $325 in December. And that was when we were up for about a week with that link broken that was hampering people. So there's an asterisk there. So far in January, 44, there's another $220, the American Cancer Society. So we're up almost 600. And I said on the drive-through this past Sunday or Monday, I believe, that there was less than 60 left. I actually went and counted. There's 66. So I did minorly lie. But when those are gone, that will be another $330. So there's almost $1,000. And I lost track on a number of the cult members have made donations in Dennis's name also to the American Cancer Society. But so I don't want to mention anybody because then I'm going to leave somebody out except one person jacked up Jeremy Bagley and his unsavory parents.
No, don't say that.
What? No, they loved it. They heard it and they loved it. They laughed uproariously at our jocularity and witty repartee. But anyway, Jacked Up Jeremy has made an offer when all of the Midnight Express pictures are sold to the 66 that I just mentioned. Not only will we donate that money, but he will make another donation of $150 to the American Cancer Society on top of that, and $150 to Jerry Gray, your friend and mine, and of the Superpodcast, who has his own battle going on with stage 4 cancer. To help his GoFundMe out. So Jeremy is setting the standard here. But anyway, so buy those pictures now at jimcornette.com. Cornette's Collectibles. Click on the Midnight Express #1 8x10 American Cancer Society. Boom. 66 more we got to go, and we'll drain Jeremy of his blood.
That's a way of putting it.
Well, no, we're going to get Jeremy to fork over. He's going to be sleeping in the street by the time we get finished with Jeremy. We're going to make him donate to the bone. Give till it hurts, Jeremy. Anyway, speaking of something that's going to hurt, have you ever wondered what it would be like, Brian, to have somebody have to take a sandblaster to your face to wipe the smile off of it?
Nope, never wondered that.
It's kept me up nights on a number of occasions. But wonder no more, because you will get to experience this, because as we just announced, and we are continuing to announce, because tickets are going fast, Chicago, have a beef with Jim Cornette on March 23rd. I'm making my debut at the C2E2, the Chicago Comic and Entertainment Expo. It's the greatest pop culture extravaganza in the Midwest every year. It's at McCormick Place in Chicago, March 22nd through the 24th. And I will be there at the Cornette's Collectibles booth all 3 days, so I'll meet everybody that comes to the convention. However, on Saturday night, it's C2E2 After Dark. I don't know if that's a comment on my appearance or where my performance deserves to be. But Saturday night, we're going to have an all VIP gathering of the Cult of Cornette, have a beef with Jim Cornette. We learned a few lessons in Philadelphia. You do not need, nor if nominated, you will not serve, but you do not need admission to C2E2 to buy the ticket to get to see this event. Now, we encourage you to come to it, and I'm going to be there also, but this is a separately ticketed event, and it's all VIP. In other words, you get to see everything. The stand-up meltdown, Chicago stories of the NWA and WWF specifically, but an interactive Q&A with all the fans. Everybody gets a free autographed 8x10, a free photo op, some personal time to hang out with me, and a classic Italian beef sandwich, ladies and gentlemen. What more can you expect from one experience, the Jim Cornette experience? And Brian Last, with his own little bony fingers, made us our own special little tiny URL. It's tinyurl.com/corny in Chicago, is it not? Oh, great one.
It is. That is your tiny URL, or
that's my
tiny Earl Hebner, as we sometimes call it.
And maybe we'll have him do a run-in and ring the bell for me. But anyway, so come on, Saturday, March 23rd. And it's the first time I've been in Chicago in years that people could meet me. And since it doesn't happen very often, I would imagine it'll be quite a while before you get the opportunity again. So cult members, pilgrimage, flock to the Midwest, Chicago. It's downtown. It's on Lakeshore Drive. It's almost going to be warm in Chicago by then, but I want everybody to come out. And also for the people in Philly, not only no ticket to C2E2 required. By the way, did I mention it's $65? Did I even mention that?
I don't believe you did.
$65 for a sandwich, for an autographed 8x10, for a photo op, for a full show, for hangout time, for so much jocularity they'll have to use that sandblaster on you. Wipe that fucking smile off your face, pal. $65 flat. All in, as they say up in Chicago. I've heard they say that up there. All in, $65. And there's no union curfew on this. The union's not. I've been promised this because in Philly, they were running us out of everywhere we could go to. We were like fugitives running from room to room.
So get your autographed sandwich today. Go to tinyurl.com/corny in Chicago.
Oh, now there's something else I'm going to have to worry about. What kind of pen's going to write on one of those buns after they're dipped in that? Well, anyway.
Did you ever notice that Trump signs everything and writes everything in Sharpie?
Well, yeah, because he wants it to look like it's a goddamn proclamation of the Sermon on the Mount or whatever. Or he's blessed everything. He's the Pope. Fucking prick. I'm going to talk about him in a second too, but hold on. I was actually going to do an addendum to my plugs.
An addendum?
In that, well, remember, it's only January, but just be planning because April 13th, Madison, West Virginia, right outside of Charleston, the Madison Civic Center, the Midnight Express 35th anniversary reunion tour continues with Sweet Stan this time. All four of us, we will be inducted into the All-Star Wrestling Hall of Fame that night and also do meet and greet and photo ops. And there's going to be a Smoky Mountain Wrestling Legends match that night between Bobby Fulton and Tracy Smothers. More on this as I don't understand how this has come to be. And I got to talk to these guys. And also, our good friend Stephen P. New will be there as well with what I understand is a special presentation he's going to make on behalf of the wrestling fans of the state of West Virginia. So it's going to be fun, and there's more stuff too. That's April 13th. May 18th, Richmond, Virginia, at the two-man Power Trip TMPT Con 3 by Cracky. All four of us, the Midnight Express reunion, plus I will be doing a VIP, and we're going to have all the details coming up real soon. But I'll be doing a VIP immediately after the Fan Fest for everybody to hang out and have some form of vittles, as they say up in Richmond. In July, in Knoxville, July 13th is the day for the Midnight Express reunion, but I'll be there July 12th through 14th at the Fanboy Expo in Knoxville. And August, Charlotte, The Gathering They're getting the old gang back together for another Charlotte reunion, and the Midnight and I will be there, as well as a bunch of other international superstars. Now, I was finished with my plugs.
Okay. Is there going to be a Greg Price dunk tank at the gathering?
I swear to God, that's the first fucking time. Of everybody that's always said do a spit take, I do a spit take listening to the fucking Experience. That's the first spit take I've ever done. Now my shit's wet here. God damn it. I cannot confirm any rumors of that. Okay. All right, real quick, and I want to let you talk about what you're doing also, but we have had such success. Oh, now it's sticky. 35 years I've had this. Now it's fucking sticky. We've had such interest in the mixtape mania that we've been doing, where I'm just reading you some of my tapes containing classic music that everyone should know, that everyone should have heard, that you've obviously been left out on in your pop culture education, my friend. But all these tapes, and people are doing the playlists on Spotify, and this is what I used to listen to in the car, you know, when we would take trips, or I'd take trips or whatever. But I want to change the game. And by the way, I do want to thank the person, I had never seen this, who sent the link on YouTube. But they sent it on Twitter, but it's on YouTube. We talked about the legend, the flaming hot, incredible fucking songstress that was Cousin Ruby Starr of Black Oak, Arkansas. But somebody tweeted a link to YouTube. Go to YouTube, folks. This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. She had another side to her. She had a soft and gentle side. Maybe I'm Amazed by Paul McCartney, but done by Ruby Starr. Being introduced on stage by Jim Dandy Mangrum himself, but he laid out of it. Incredible. She could have been the next Linda Ronstadt or whatever.
No,
unbelievable.
Not really.
Oh, for heaven's sake. But we have brought back some of these great artists to prominence. Black Oak, Arkansas, Tony Carey, Sniffing the Tears, Brewer and Shipley.
Well, hold on. Let me jump in right now. That was one song that didn't come to me when you went over it last week. And when I went and watched the video, because someone sent me a video of them performing it, instantly I knew what it is. And I have to say, that is easily the best song on all of the tapes that you've gone through so far.
Oh, I don't know if I'd go that far, because there was a lot of classics, but I wanted to change the game up a little bit today. And as a matter of fact, I'll show you the fans. Hold on. Hear this. The fans have been loving it.
That proves nothing. I mean, you just make
Jim. No, I'm going to read you this email. Jim, just wanted to thank you for turning me on to Black Oak, Arkansas and Ruby Starr. I have heard my father talk about seeing them in concert in the 70s, but really didn't research or listen to any of the music. After hearing you talk about them, I wanted to see what they were all about. Love them and Ruby Starr. I love old school wrestling in both of your shows and listen every week. Keep up the great work. Sincerely, a black lung coal mining motherfucker from Southern West Virginia, Craig.
I like his sign off.
So the black lung coal mining motherfuckers in Southern West Virginia are liking the mixtape mania. I'm changing the rules up on you today. I'm gonna make this easier on you so you don't look so bad.
Okay.
Ruining your image, your reputation.
No, you haven't. I know good music. You still haven't gone through any of the good stuff yet.
I just mentioned Brewer and Shipley and Sniffing the Tears.
Sniffing the Tears, I'll give you. They have one great song.
Well, there you go. And boy, you could drive through the night listening to it. But anyway, this time I'm not going to give you a bunch of different artists. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to confuse the issue with a bunch of different artists all over the page and different genres of music. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you, because this is one of my greatest. Here, listen to this. That's in the box, the cassette tape. This is one of my greatest hits tape of two artists, bands, groups, two entities that I admired and that I liked, and I had a lot of their music. So I correlated all of some of their favorite songs that they've done on this one tape. So one side's one particular artist or group or whatever, the other side is the other one. Your choice, or your task, I should say.
It ain't my choice.
Well, it's my choice. It's your task, mother. Let's just remember who the fucking choice maker is and who the task doer is around here, Baba Louie. Anyway, So I'm going to read these tracks, and I want to see how many tracks that I can get out before you name the performer, or in some cases, perpetrator of these musical masterpieces. Do you have this? Do you understand the rules now?
I think so. You have one cassette tape on each side is the best of, according to you, of that said artist. So it's going to be two different artists.
Okay. Yes. Side one. Track number one. Brother Man.
Curtis Mayfield.
Incorrect. Oh. Track number two. Right on Time.
Track number three.
Track number three, Blam.
I have no idea.
Track number four, you're going to get this. Ride-O Rocket.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I do know who this is.
I
think I know who this is. I'm going to let you do one more so I can confirm if I know who this is.
Well, hold on. Let me make sure it's a hard one, because I figured you'd be all the way down to the end. Street Wave.
The Brothers Johnson.
You are correct. I can't believe you got it that quick. We also had Stomp, followed by Ain't We Funkin' Now? And, of course, can you guess the final track? If all the greatest Brothers Johnson hits together are on one side of this tape, can you guess the final track? After Brother Man, Right on Time, Blam, Ride-O Rocket, Street Wave, Stomp, and Ain't We Funkin' Now? What's left?
I don't know.
Oh, my God. Oh, for heaven's sake. That's like saying, what's Baron von Raschke's finishing hold? The Claw. They are instantly identifiable. The one that it was on top of this, actually.
Strawberry Letter number 23.
Strawberry Letter 23. There you have it. The Brothers Johnson, a very underrated combo, what guitar work, and Strawberry Letter 23. Tell me how that's not the most beautiful thing ever recorded.
That's the song. It was written by oh shit! I used to have the album. It wasn't written by them. It was
it was
Shuggy Otis, right?
Shuggy Otis.
Yeah,
but they reorchestrated for their brand of futuristic funk. But Strawberry Letter 23 is never mentioned in the song. Everything in the song says Strawberry Letter 22 because the girl that instigated the writing of the song used to write old Shuggy Otis letters on strawberry scented paper. And when he was reading the 22nd that she had sent to him is when he wrote that song.
Okay, so now side one is clearly funk. Is side two the same genre?
Not at all.
Okay, great.
Now, see, I figured I'd have you with the Brothers Johnson all the way down to the bottom. This, I'm either going to have you all the way down close to the bottom or you're going to it's one or the other. It ain't going to be in the middle. Side two, track one. A Dream Within a Dream.
I don't know.
Track two, The Raven.
Again, I don't know. So far, these are both Edgar Allan Poe poems, I believe.
Well, they're not in this context, but you are. Track three, The Telltale Heart.
I don't know.
Track four, A Cask of Amontillado.
I'm not getting this one. I'm telling you.
Track five, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather. Next track. Wait a minute. I lost track here. Hold on. I lost track of the tracks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Track 6, Voyager.
Is this Alan Parsons?
Boom goes the dynamite.
Okay, I never thought about the fact that he had 2 songs named after Edgar Allan Poe poems.
No, it's an entire album. Dream Within a Dream, The Raven, The Telltale Heart, A Cask of Amontillado, and The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather is one entire side of the Tales of Mystery and Imagination concept album, which was the Alan Parsons project. I believe it was either their first album or very early.
Yeah. And
then the other side was one entire track. The same musical piece that was A Dream Within a Dream revisited or whatever. But also on this, Voyager was a different album, but Voyager led to What Goes Up, One More River, Damned If I Do, followed by the two I knew you would get, I, Robot, and Wouldn't Want to Be Like You.
One of these days you need to let me reverse this, and I get to ask you about one of my mixtapes from way back and see how many songs you could actually get.
I ain't going to know any of that Outlaw Mud Show bullshit.
Oh,
but
come
this
on.
is stuff that everybody should... Now tell me, Alan Parsons, the engineer for Pink Floyd's A Dark Side of the Moon album, one of the most talented producers. The Alan Parsons Project, obviously, because it was his project. He put the best musicians together. They didn't tour live. They did all recordings. And Alan Parsons was a musical genius. I have you know. But yeah, the Tales of Mystery and Magic, just sit and put a set of headphones on and listen to that whole side of that album when you're in your favorite relaxation mode.
Okay.
What are you doing? All right, now that I've almost, you actually, I thought I'd stump you on one of them, so you did better than I thought you would. But now that I've almost stumped you, what are you doing that stumps everybody else this week?
I'm going to have a lot of things to stump a lot of people this week here on the Superpodcast and, of course, the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. This week on Ron Fuller Studcast, Cowboy Bill Watts joins the show to talk all about the 1974 turn of Dusty Rhodes. I don't think you could argue one of the biggest angles in wrestling history and one that transformed Florida wrestling from one territory to another. It went from Jack Briscoe and heavy on wrestling to Dusty Rhodes, heavy on blood, heavy on personality. One of the real transformative moments in wrestling history.
And made one of the biggest stars anywhere of the 70s and 80s.
Absolutely. And you get to hear Bill Watts talk all about it. He was the booker. You can hear that at fullerpod.com or wherever it is that you find your favorite podcasts. I also want to mention this week on Kentucky Fried Wrestling, Howard Baum joins the show to talk with Scott Bowden about his memories of the 1984 WFIA Tag Team of the Year award ceremony to the new fabulous ones. I don't know how they won the award, but Tommy Rich and Eddie Gilbert, one of the bloodiest angles ever on Memphis TV. And actually, let me ask you, Jim, can you think of many angles?
How did they win the award? They won the award because they were the team that the promotion wanted to get the award.
Oh, no, but can you think of any angles or how many angles on Memphis TV were bloodier than that one?
Oh, good Lord. Not many. I mean, they've had some blood in their day in Memphis in the studio, but no, that was it looked like, you know what? It looked like Jackie Crockett come in one day and said, well, fuck. They were promoting, I think, the Superdome show coming up or something, the co-promotion with Watts and Crockett in early 86, but they sent the DiBiase Flair match from Mid-South Television, where DiBiase, Murdoch turned on him and ran him into the post and gave him the brain buster and everything, and he sliced open, and they put the pressure bandage on, and he goes out and challenges Flair for the title. It is the greatest one-hour television show in wrestling history, and switched DiBiase babyface, and he's carried off in the ambulance. But Jackie Crockett said, we can't fucking show this on TBS. It looks like they've run him through a razor blade factory. It was bloody. It was bloody.
Well, hear more about that as well as Jerry Lawler in Florida at kfrpod.com or wherever you find your favorite podcast. Also want to make mention, Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam and Sean Goodwin at mcadampod.com. Breaking Kayfabe with Baldwin and Barry. They look at the latest NXT UK event at baldwinpod.com. The Mid-South Wrestling Television Review with me and Mike Mills. We're up to the spring of 1982. Check that out at midsouthpod.com. And of course, the 605 Super Podcast, The Mothership. This week on the show, we have a packed show. Jerry Gray joins the show again to share some great stories from his career, as well as Kurt Brown talking about his memories of when he first discovered the Dynamite Kid in 1983. We also have Ross Hart on the show, the family historian of the Hart family, to talk about the impact Dynamite had on Calgary. This is a really interesting segment. I think everyone will really dig that. Plus, George Shire on Larry the Axe Hennig, and a very special segment with Todd Lloyd talking about, and I'm not going to give this away right now, talking about a story that will include Jim Varney, Randy Savage, Sweet Daddy Siki, and so much more. You can hear that at 605pod.com or available wherever it is that you find your very favorite podcasts, The Mothership.
Oh, how do you have time? Where do you find the time to do all these things?
Who said I had time?
Well, you're not making lists.
No, I'm not making lists. No.
Just real quick, before we talk about the old wrestling stuff that'll make me happy at least. I don't care about y'all. I'm thinking about myself, as I mentioned. But I don't even know where to be. People have been saying, well, you've been taking it easy on politics lately. I can't fucking watch, and it's all what we've already known and what more can be said. But now we have found out that the Federal Bureau of Investigation actually thought that there was enough reason, enough suspicious activity, enough what the fuck is this moron doing going on in Donald Trump's life that they should investigate for the first time in 240 fucking years, whatever, whether the President of the United States was working on behalf of a foreign adversary. And there's still 33% of these motherfuckers that strongly approve. I'm talking to you. If you're one of them, fuck you. You goddamn ignorant cocksuckers. At this point, we've already gone past the point where, okay, we've absolved the people who had buyer's remorse immediately and realized, oh my God, what have I done? And maybe it was just a protest vote, like all the people in the UK said that's the reason why they voted themselves out of the EU and Brexit. It was a protest vote. They didn't think it actually happened. So we absolved then. We said, all right, you've learned your lesson. And then for the people, I think several months ago, we said, all right, if you voted for him and you tried to give him a chance, but you figured it out by now, then everybody can make a mistake, and we will allow you to become part of our polite society again instead of ostracizing you out to a goddamn ranch in Montana somewhere. I believe that was a few months ago, right?
Yeah.
Officially now, if wherever you 33% are that ain't figured this fucking shit out and come along with the rest of us now, and you still believe this fucking fat-jowled burger buying, he turned me off fucking burgers, fat-jowled burger buying, pig anus mouthed, lying, fraud, charlatan, con man, carpetbagger, swindler, dickless, limp penised pussy, instead of the goddamn FBI and the Department of Justice and NBC News and CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the fucking Wall Street Journal and everybody with a half a goddamn thought and Stevie Wonder and Helen Keller that know if he's not crooked, he's stupid, and if he's not stupid, he's crooked, and chances are he's both. So if you're still out there at that 33%, fuck you.
Hey, Jim, can I give a quick plug here? And I don't know the person, but I'm reading this book. It is fucking fantastic. I recommend it to everyone, even if you're not a fan of football. It's called Football for a Buck by Jeff Pearlman. And it's all about the USFL. There's a great section there about Jeff Gaylord, if anyone wants to read it for that reason. But it's filled with amazing stories. And of course, one of the big stories is how Donald Trump got involved and completely fucking destroyed the USFL.
Okay, I was waiting for you to fucking tie somehow.
Yeah, it is so good. And you read about his incompetence, and there's a letter in the book. Have you ever heard about the letter that the owner of the Tampa Bay Bandits sent Donald Trump?
No.
Hold on, I'm going to read this to you.
Well, yeah, that's right. It was 30 years ago that he was fucking football up. The stakes and the college and every business that he started and folded, football predated many of them.
Yeah, listen to this letter. Dear Donald, on a number of occasions over the past meetings, I have listened with astonishment at your personal abuse of the commissioner and various of your partners if they did not happen to espouse one of your causes or agree with one of your arguments. It is obvious from the record that you are a talented and successful young man. It is also a fact that I regard you as a friend and an owner who has made a contribution to the league in general and been a savior to the New York, New Jersey team in particular. While others may be able to let your insensitive and denigrating comments pass, I will no longer. You are bigger, younger, and stronger than I, which means I'll have no regrets whatsoever punching you right in the mouth the next time an instance occurs where you personally scorn me or anyone else who does not happen to salute and dance to your tune. I really hope you don't know that you are doing it, but you are not only damaging yourself with your associates, but alienating them as well. Think before you shoot, and when you do fire, stick to the message without killing the messenger. Kindest personal regards, John F. Bassett.
Wow.
1984.
So he's been like that for 35 years.
Much longer, but yes.
Well, he's been like that all his life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's nothing we already didn't know. It's just more people are finding it out. More people talking about it. More people saying it. And they still don't fucking get it. The fucking, these things. I can't call them people. They have no souls. They support a fucking felonious goddamn philanderer. They have no minds. They can't see what's in front of them. They have no cognitive ability to understand facts or to reason. He took the notes of the interpreter from his one-on-one meeting with Putin and stuck them in his pocket.
And the thing that drives me crazy is the people that say, well, he built successful businesses. You don't understand. And I'm like, well, if you look into his business history, you realize he never really built any successful businesses. He's destroyed several. And his father has bailed him out multiple times. And then when his father stopped bailing him out, even though he still gave him large sums of money, and of course, he inherited most of his wealth from his father.
Well, yes, that was on the front page of the fucking Washington Post and the New York Times.
Yeah. But people
all of this.
People still think he was a successful businessman. He had to get handouts, and he had to have someone hold his hand and bail him out of one situation after another. And that's why he doesn't develop anymore. That's why he just licenses his name, because he can't get money. Yeah.
He's a gimmick. That's what he is. We didn't elect 33 out of 100 people in this fucking country apparently have brain damage and elected a fucking gimmick. And now here's what we're getting. And people they're actually, I think around the world, they're actually stopping laughing now, because I think now they're getting pissed because it's serious. And it's not just, look at those fucking clown show fucking goofy Americans anymore. It's this guy could fuck up the world.
And now Pelosi's there, and she basically just canceled the State of the Union today. I don't know if you saw that before.
No, what?
She said, I don't think you should do the State of the Union. Why don't you submit something in writing, or we postpone it? And she actually has the power to cancel the State of the Union, the same way she has the power to get his tax return. So it's going to be a bumpy ride for 2019. And Michael Cohen testifies in a few weeks, so I can't wait.
I sound like Jerry Clower now. All right, I got an email here real quick from the one of the fine cult members. He's been around for a while, been around since the beginning. Kevin Orcutt, out in Idaho.
Good guy. I know Kevin.
He's been doing research for a book that he wants to write on the history of wrestling in especially Lewiston, Idaho, which is his hometown and actually is one of the, I don't want to say only cities in Idaho, one of the main cities. And it's a big time place in Idaho. On a local level, they like it out there. Anyway, he gave a bunch of history, but all the way back to the 19-teens. But in the 40s, Bud Huddleston and Basil Wiggins, two household names in wrestling, but I've never heard of them actually, but they ran Lewiston together. From 1944 to 1947, they brought in names like Lee Grable, Ted Christie, Jim Londos, Celie Samara, Mildred Burke, Mae Weston, the French Angel, the Masked Marvel, Swedish Angel, Lord Albert Mills, Ted King Kong Cox, Earl McCready, Roy McClarty, Jack Claiborne, just to name a few. Tex Hager of the NWA was one of the original NWA members, I think. Was he not, or shortly after? But he ran Lewiston from 1951 to 1955 with the help of Gentleman Dale Haddock. Not to be confused with our old Elizabethtown, Kentucky promoter, Hollywood Dale Duncan. Anyway, Hager was headquartered in Boise, Idaho from 1949 to 1955 when he moved to Spokane, Washington. He controlled Idaho, Montana, Eastern Washington, Utah, and a couple of Oregon towns. This may have been when that territory was the biggest. He would even go on to run Seattle for a period of time. At certain points, Hager had more power in the Northwest than Don Owen. Hager was held in quite high regard as a promoter and controlled the booking for the World's Light Heavyweight Championship for the NWA. He decided to put the belt on put the light heavyweight belt on Frank Stojak, who I've heard of, who held the title for 4 years in the 50s, and he relinquished the title when he became secretary of the Washington State Athletic Commission. So when's that going to happen? In modern day, Tyler, this wrestler just retired, so we're going to make him the chairman of the State Athletic Commission. There were a lot of top stars brought in by Hager, including Bill Melby, Gypsy Joe Dorsetti, Red Berry, Baron Michel Leone, Kurt von Poppenheim, which I always thought was a great name for a German. Besides, when Mad Dog Vachon wanted Baron von Raschke to be Baron von Pumpkin. Gorgeous George and Leo the Lion Newman, just to name a few. But Hager is the one who apparently was the first promoter to get Tough Tony Bourne over, who was a legend in that part of the country, and broke in Karl von Hess, who was a huge name in the business, but at that time was wrestling under his real name. Do you remember Karl von Hess is the 50s version? His real name?
No.
Frank Fackety. It's spelled, I swear to God, it's spelled Faketty. So this poor guy became a wrestler, but he had fake in his last name, and it was pronounced, if you were liberal with it, Faggoty. So
what was
that's
Fargo's
why he
real
changed his name.
What was Jackie Fargo's real name?
It was oh God damn it! How do you spell it? Now of all people, Mark James will disown me.
I can't believe this is what I stumped you on.
No, it was Faggart.
Yes.
Faggg. Well, I was trying to figure out how to spell it because it was Faggert. So that's probably another reason why that they changed their names as well. But anyway, Hager actually trained Bill Fletcher, who went on to be better known as Rocket Monroe, one of the Monroe brothers. Harry Eliot, who was also a promoter in Seattle for some period of time, would take over from 1962 to 1970 in Idaho and bring in a lot of top stars like Billy White Wolf, Darling Dagmar, Stan Stasiak, Soldat Gorky, Pat Patterson, Luther Lindsay, the Haiti Kid, Dutch Savage, the Tolos Brothers, Don Leo Jonathan, Don Jardine, Dory Funk Jr., Dutch Savage, and George Cannon. Gene Kiniski even defended the NWA World Heavyweight title in Lewiston against Abdullah the Butcher on June 7th, 1968. I bet that was a fucking stem winder. As a matter of fact, with Abby in 68, he was what, like 260?
Yeah. He just
and fucking Kiniski, that would have been interesting. Anyway.
Hey, can I ask you a couple things about this? And
yes, you certainly can. Feel free.
I've been in touch with Kevin, and I got to commend him because he's certainly bringing a lot of light to Tex Hager, who's a name that most people don't know. And it's nice to know that he's researching this, and he's a young guy, so it's good to know that there are young historians out there. But a name...
Oh, I thought you meant it's going to take him so long it's good he's young, you'll never live to see it fucking finish.
Well, that too. But there's a name you mentioned in there that came up in Kevin's research, and it's a name that I almost never hear mentioned, but when you go back and you look at either things like the old NWA calendar or old magazines and programs from the 50s, you see his name a lot, and he was obviously a big star, but he's been forgotten. Tell me about Bill Melby.
Oh, Melby was actually huge in the Midwest. He was, except for maybe the Chicago Wrestling Archives, I don't know if there'd be any video yet, but he was always a featured name. And I always thought it was a gimmick that Jim Melby of the Wrestling News, he must have stolen Bill Melby. That must have been his favorite wrestler, but no, it was his real name. But he was a baby face, just one of those fucking guys who was always in main events, like I've seen in programs in the late 40s and through the 50s, and was well thought of, but I haven't really seen that much of him.
Yeah, there are some guys that have just been forgotten at time. I remember off air a while back, you and I were talking about Mr. America Gene Stanley.
Yeah.
A guy there's so much promotional material on. He was merchandised maybe more than anyone back then. And he's never talked about. And I never really hear anyone bring him up as one of the big stars of the era. I never hear too many people talk about how he drew or how he didn't draw. So there's another guy that's almost.
Oh, well, I mean, he worked on top in a lot of places. So I assume he drew. And a lot of people, if you said Wilbur Snyder, they go, who? And when I first started watching wrestling, obviously, and seeing the Indianapolis show, Bruiser show that we talked about, Bruiser and Snyder were partners, and that's where Snyder had already pretty much semi-retired. He owned the company, and he worked just in the state of Indiana for himself. Maybe he might make a shot or two out somewhere if he was going to go on a business trip and visit another territory, which we'll talk more about here in a second. But his career pretty much ended by his own choice because he made a bunch of money and retired to Florida right before VCRs came in. So he'd come up, he would fly up from Florida for the monthly Indianapolis shows or every 3 weeks or whatever and work on that because he was still such a name. But otherwise, at the end, by the time VCRs came around, he wasn't even doing spot shows anymore, I don't think. But he was a top 10 box office attraction, one of the top athletic baby faces in the country in the 50s, got all the NWA world title matches with Pat O'Connor or fucking Thez or whatever. The U.S. champion on Chicago network television, when really the only U.S. champions that they made off that Chicago TV were Vern Gagne, Dick the Bruiser, and Wilbur Snyder, I think.
Yeah. And at that time, the U.S. title was like the world title for Chicago TV.
Well, yeah, it was their television promotions, number one belt. So it was a national title. But, nobody remembers Wilbur anymore because he's, and apparently, and see, I didn't know. I was like, this guy ain't really very good when I'm watching him, right? I didn't know he'd been in the business for almost 25 years. He was in his mid-fucking 40s, right? He's still doing flying head scissors, though. And, I mean, you could tell now looking back on it with grown-up eyes, he was a great athlete and a great worker in his day, and you could tell still a little bit of it just with him dabbling in his own promotion. But, he must have been fantastic in his day, and nobody talks about him, but he was, huge both at the box office and in terms of being a good worker.
You think there were any smart-ass fans in the mid-'60s sitting in the front row doing Mr. Ed impressions? Hello, Wilbur, as he walked to the ring.
I don't think they did it more than once. If they Anyway, this kind of ties into one of the things I was going to talk about, and this was not an email, this was a tweet, and I've jotted it down in shorthand, but basically somebody tweeted me that today wrestlers, if they're unhappy with their spot or their push, well, I think they say if they're unhappy with their creative, right, which is their spot or their push, or just they're unhappy with how they're being used, they take to Twitter and say little snide things, or they do this and that in social media or whatever. But what would they do back in the territory days if they weren't happy with the way they were being used? And I tweeted the guy back, give their 2 weeks notice and go get booked somewhere else, right? That's actually the answer.
Yeah.
But it's more complicated than that, and hopefully more interesting. We'll find out shortly. But a lot of people today, both in and out of the business, don't understand how guys did get booked, or if they were being booked and they were unhappy, what they did about it back then, because now it's been, as we said, 30 or 40 years or whatever. And I can't speak to, well, I can, because I've read up and done the research, but firsthand, personally, I can speak to the late 70s and the 80s in wrestling as to, how things worked. And it depended on who you were, but you've got to remember that especially in the 70s when all the territories were cooking. And then, after the mid 80s, it got a lot harder. But if you were on the card somewhere working for a promoter in some territory, you were there basically because the booker had brought you in and wanted to use you. And if you weren't making any money or weren't really getting ahead or didn't like the territory for whatever reason, didn't like the way you were being used or had a better opportunity, what you did was you gave them 2 weeks notice. You went in, hopefully as soon as you knew, and told the booker, hey, I got to finish up in 2 weeks because I'm, if you're in Dallas, I'm going back to Tennessee or whatever. And that was it. And they'd say, oh, shit, they might try to talk you out of it. They might not, depending on whether they really wanted you or it might be they were trying to give you the gentle Iggy by not featuring you and not paying you much money that they really didn't have anything for you. You might want to find a place, to begin with. So they might be relieved, or they might try to talk you out of it if they'd been trying to fuck you on money and or whatever, but they still had something important they wanted you to do. But normally you gave 2 weeks notice, and that would give them time to, at the next TV taping or whatever, maybe have you do a job and have you do a job a week or two around the territory to put whoever over on the way out. That was pretty much because that's the way that you quit. The way that you got hired was a little bit more complicated, but not really that much, because you have to, and feel free, Brian, if I don't make anything clear, to jump in and grill me here. But let's say throughout the 70s, you pretty much had 25 different wrestling territories running full time in various parts of the country with television and running a full schedule of local events, correct? So if you're in Kansas City at that time, and I can testify that in Kansas City, when I got into business in 1982, they were not doing too good. I would say that the guys, except for whoever the booker was, were doing good to make $300 or $400 a week. Now that equals today $1,000 because you remember the hotels were fucking $24 or whatever, and et cetera. But Kansas City, I think in the early 80s was probably the poverty row of territories. So and I know what the pay was like because in 83, the only time I ever tried to get booked out anywhere and was unsuccessful, thank goodness, Ken Wayne was talking to Buck Robley when he was booking Kansas City, right? And I'm just languishing. I'm not making $300 a week because I'm just on the buttermilk run and just being Jimmy Hart's, second assistant or whatever. And Ken says, well, you want me to see if I can get you booked? I said, well, maybe it might be better for me to go away a little while so they can miss me, right? So Ken comes back and tells me, well, I talked to Buck, and he said, well, can he work? And Ken said, I said, well, he's doing manager matches. He said, well, we can't, unless we can use him on the card too. They were in a state then where they had like 12 guys, and they couldn't bring a manager in unless he could also wrestle one of the matches on the card because they couldn't afford any more guys. But Buck said, I made $350 last week, but that was for wrestling and booking.
Wow.
And I was like, so anyway, I was unsuccessful in that, but I mean, that was the poverty row of territories at that point. But I've also mentioned that in 1982 in Memphis underneath the first 6 months when I was being used, managing Adrian Street, et cetera, was making $400, $500, $600 a week, which is like between 1,000 and 13 or 14 today. If you in the late 70s, early 80s, like I said, Kansas City a full-time guy just on the cards, wherever, maybe making 12 or 15 grand a year. That's almost 40 today. They were full-time wrestlers. But if you were in a good spot in a decent territory and you were, a fairly top guy, you would probably be grossing 50 grand, which is about 130 today. And we know from the paychecks that we've not only collected personally, that I've collected personally, but also that we've collected from other territories and promotions that have been out there and the St. Louis pay records that exist and et cetera. If you were in the late 70s, early 80s, a main event guy in the Carolinas, the WWF, maybe Mid-South, especially JYD, the AWA, top main event guys there were making 100 to 150, which is like 260 to 390 today. Nick Bockwinkel told me, and this was not bragging, like say, I make this much money. But when I first got into business, I was able to take him to dinner after a Louisville show one night. And he was educating me, telling me what the different territories were like, how they paid, what guys could make, different stories. And he told me in confidence, not to be spread around, that working for Vern, he worked 18 to 20 days a month in the wintertime and maybe 12 in the summertime. And especially carrying his belt was making 150 grand a year then, which is fucking $500,000 today, right? In the late 70s. And then guys like the Bruno when he was WWF champ, or Andre or the NWA champ, 350 grand is 800 to $1 million today. That was kind of the pecking order. You could be in Kansas City making fucking $300 or $400 a week, or you could eventually be the NWA champion, maybe. I know the Freebirds made around 150 grand in Dallas in 83, that hot 82, 83, that hot run with the fucking Von Erichs. And as I mentioned, the Midnight Night made right under 175 in the calendar year of 1986, which is 400 grand a day. And that was on payoffs. There was no pay-per-view. There was no merchandising. There was no television rights fees. So I would imagine Dusty and Flair in that run for Crockett, the 86, the hottest year, would probably equal $1 million today a year, what they made. But you hear guys either exaggerate either up or down. Some guys like to tell a story where they always got fucked and they never made any money, but they should have. And some guys like to exaggerate the money they made past all the point of reason, right? I think I'm the only one that's in the middle and actually, legitimate because I kept all my shit and I studied it. But who you were in wrestling depended on how you would go about getting booked. If you were a job guy, whoever trained you or broke you in, whether it's Mike Jackson in Alabama, we talked about, used to just throw guys in the car and bring them to Atlanta TV to get beat up. Danny Davis, before he wrestled in Tennessee, his home territory, he actually wrestled in the Cobo in Detroit for the Sheik. Because when Herb Welch was training those guys out on his farm in Dyersburg, and Nick and the Sheik were always close, and Sheik won in 1978 needs, send me 6 guys, do some jobs. So they put 6 fucking guys off the farm in a car and sent them up there to get carved up on TV. That's how you got booked. You couldn't do it yourself. You had to get in that way. But then once somebody saw you, they might ask for you again. Or some of the boys might take a liking to you and trade some phone numbers. Because eventually, from being a job guy on local TV, and sometimes this would never happen, but if you had talent and the boys recognized that, or the promoter started asking for you again, then you might get booked on the card to lose in the opening match, or just to fill in stuff. Or let's say you finally got full time, but you're still just on the card. Once again, in Memphis, the underneath guys in the early 80s made $400 a week for working 6 times. But the underneath guys in a hot territory like the Carolinas might make 8 or 9 because the overall houses were bigger. Because the main event guys in Memphis might make $1,000, but the top guys other places might make $2,000. So the underneath guys that just got on the card were always looking for a better spot. And whether they would get a promoter's address or telephone number or whatever, or send pictures to the office. Bobby Fulton told me one time when he finally got booked in Calgary for a little while, he had sent pictures. Well, he had called. He had got Stu Hart's phone number and actually got a hold of Stu Hart one day, I guess at the office in his house. And he says, Stu was like, hey, what do you look like, kid? Well, sir, I'm, 5'9" or whatever, and I'm 200 something pounds. And, well, can you send some pictures? So you would have 8x10s made, and you would send the pictures to the promoter and with your phone number on it. And if they liked the way you looked and they needed a baby face or a heel or a fucking tag team or whatever the fuck you looked like in the picture, and somebody could maybe vouch for you, or you could mention somebody's name that was over there in that territory, then they'd say, well, come in and we'll book you. Well, it was kind of on you, because if you had misrepresented and you really sucked, you knew they'd book you for 2 weeks and you'd already moved across the country or whatever, and were just going to get fucking fired. So you were pretty, most of the time guys were up front. And then that's, as we've talked about before, that's how guys progressed in the business. Because let's say that a guy that was just working on the cards underneath in Memphis got a chance to go to Calgary. Well, now he's being featured a little better. He might be making only an extra $100 a week, but he's been a better spot. He's getting experience. He's getting to work with guys that are better than him, and he's getting to know these guys in the locker room. Because then as you progress in the business, the more bookers you meet and please and work for, the more that you can call later on when you need a job, especially as you climb up the ladder. Now you can call, let's say a guy Buddy Landell had been a dark-haired, baby-faced job guy in Louisiana in 1982, working for when Ernie Ladd was booking in Mid-South. But 2 years later, he's worked on his work and he's worked on his gimmick, and now he's a bleached blonde heel and he can run that mouth, and he's gotten better and he's grown up a little bit, at least in the ring, maybe not outside of it. And so when Bill Dundee takes over as booker, Bill Watts already remembers Buddy Landell. He was a good kid. He always liked him. Oh, now we can push him a little bit. And they used him until, Buddy's worst instincts got the better of him. But you would step up the ladder that way, and then guys would be able to vouch for you. Like if Dusty Rhodes in Charlotte got a call about a guy named Arn Anderson, or Marty Lundy in Georgia. Yeah, he works as Arn Anderson. Oh, now we can send a tape, right? Because the 80s videotape came in. So they start trading tapes around. But gradually, guys got booked by that method of networking and by having known or met or worked for some of the bookers that usually booked in the territories. And it's nothing new. It goes back to, Strangler Lewis and Toots Mondt and Billy Sandow. Every booker had their crew that they were comfortable with, that knew what they wanted to do, that they could trust, that they liked to take care of. So a lot of times guys were limited to different parts of the country, not limited to, but they worked in different parts of the country because the Sheik and Bruiser came up at the same time and in the Midwest. So they used a lot of the same guys. The Sheik for years, because guys that fit his style, like Pampiro Firpo and the Mighty Igor, Bobo Brazil and Abdullah the Butcher and Tex McKenzie and the guys that he got over in the 50s or got over with in the 60s, he used. Bruiser did the same, but Bruiser had connections with Gagne and the AWA too, because they were partners in Chicago. So a lot of the AWA guys that didn't have to work every night for Vern would come in and be stars for Bruiser in Indianapolis and in his major Indiana towns once or twice a week. The Tennessee guys, because they knew the style, would rotate amongst the territories. But, guys that just worked 5 years of their lives rotating between Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas could be main event guys that make $100,000 a year and never leave that part of the country. But otherwise, sometimes, a booker would get a job if he had, let's say previously, obviously, Eddie Graham spawned a lot of bookers. So Eddie Graham trained Bill Watts to be a booker, and Kevin Sullivan, and really Dusty Rhodes. And so let's say that Watts got a job. He went back home and got a job booking for Leroy McGurk. He would always try to keep that pipeline of talent open, so there would always be freshness because the territories could trade amongst themselves. So, the guys didn't have any problem really. Underneath guys did have a problem finding a place to go. If you were in the wrestling business in the early 80s and you weren't making $400 a week, you were looking for a place to go. And at that level, sometimes those were filled up and those guys weren't in high demand. But main event guys, anytime they wanted to leave, they had a proven track record of drawing money in 2 or 3 or 4 different territories that they'd been to before and knew those bookers or the promoters. If they'd hired new bookers, they just call around and see what a spot opened up. You need a heel, you need a baby face, you need a tag team. What about if so-and-so, we're working a fucking program with each other in Georgia? What about if we come up there and do it for you, Vince Sr.? They all kept in contact. So, but at the upper level, the Sheik was not only such a huge box office star, but he owned Detroit, and in the 60s especially was one of the big wrestling cities in the country. So he not only would work Los Angeles and Texas and Georgia and all these other places as a draw on the cards, but when he would go have meetings with these other promoters, I remember one of the first times I worked Greensboro was late 1985 or early 80. I think it was January 86. We had just started for Crockett not long before that. And Harley Race was on the card. Well, he wasn't in the territory. It was a cold match with Magnum TA, I think, for the U.S. title. And the reason why is because Harley Race was a former world champion. He was such a name and such a card. It gave Greensboro more prestige to have him there, and he was willing to put Magnum TA over. But at the same time, he was in discussing business because he was part owner of the Kansas City territory. So he sits down with Jimmy Crockett and discusses business, which Crockett, wasn't much later, ended up owning Kansas City. And they paid him probably $1,000 or $1,500 and bought him a plane ticket and flew him over there to pay for the trip and make some money on the trip. At the top level, guys would work back and forth like that. That's why you'd see sometimes top guys like Eddie Graham did that a lot in the 70s. When he visited the other NWA territories, you'd see him and Mike pop up on the cards. Anyway, it was a whole lot easier to get booked, and there were no contracts, which would have actually, and like I said, wrestling was not meant to be national, because now if you get a contract, yes, if you get a good contract, you're making guaranteed money or you're making plenty of money. But you are also beholden to be in that one spot in that one location with that one group of people on the same television until you basically have no value left or your contract runs out and you get a better deal somewhere else. Because how can I miss you if you won't go away? Talent was always fresh because it wasn't given a chance to get stale in the territory system. But when you can see all of the, and if you're not on the WWE TV right now, that means that you're so low on the totem pole, they don't have time for you. So that's not good. So I've always thought that not only the national television, but the contracts it took some of the edge off the game in terms of not being able to keep talent fresh and keep things fresh for everybody. Unless you're one of the several biggest stars in the business, sooner or later, no matter where you are, people are going to get tired of you. And that's when having many other places to go helped out, and to go develop things and then bring them back, and they were brand new and unseen in the territory you're already over in. Now you can get even more over. And the contracts also, as we all know, made shot in the foot some people's fucking motivation. In WCW in 89 and 90, you couldn't hardly get some of those guys to show up for work if they were making guaranteed money, because they knew that's all they were going to make, because then the promotions dropped the ball and now can't draw crowds to the point where that's what you make is your guarantee, pretty much. So the economics of the entire business has changed, my boy.
Can I ask you a couple questions here?
Please do.
One, when you talked about 1983 and how you were really not making much money, at any point during that period of time, do you think to yourself, maybe I should go back to being a photographer? Because you were making a lot of money as a photographer.
No, that was done. How could I go back? That was part of the deal. Because I knew without him having to tell me, but of course he did explain to me that, no, once I have gone on television and announced that I'm this rich prick that wants to get into wrestling and gone to the step of becoming a heel and yelling at the people and doing all that shit and everything, I can't be a photographer at ringside again. Another territory maybe, but not there. If I'd whipped Bill Dundee with a belt on television and had my exotically gay wrestler from England kiss him on the fucking mouth, how is he going to permit me to be at ringside taking pictures of his matches and ever turn his back on me or not beat the fuck out of me? No, I knew when I made the switch that it was not a reversible fucking procedure, sort of like a vasectomy, but worse.
And my second question, to go to that whole discussion about, similar to Kansas City, guys starving, territories that weren't making much money, although it's a little different. I was just talking to my friend Dan Farron the other day, and he told me about when he ran into Moolah one time at CAC, right after Nick Gulas died. And she went up to him and she goes, Nick Gulas died. And he said, oh, he didn't know what to say. She goes, no more $5 payoffs. And that was what she said. Now, to that point, it made me wonder, you've heard all these stories. I mean, I have, and you can tell me what's true and what isn't, that Gulas would promise guys a lot of money, or at least some money, get them to the territory, get them to move down there, and then starve them so they couldn't leave. Any truth to that?
Well, yes, there's some truth to that. I don't know if that was the original intent. I mean, I don't think he intended to starve them so that they couldn't leave. I think that was an unintended byproduct of just starving them in general. Here's the thing. Nick and Roy, and really everybody that I've talked to that was kind of in the know said that Roy Welch was the man behind the scenes and almost everything, and Nick was the heat guy. If Roy was nice to everybody, to the boys, and it was Roy, he was one of the boys, and Nick was there to take the heat, but Roy Welch was the brains behind the whole thing. And sometimes whatever, if Roy wanted to pass the buck, he'd say, well, talk to the Greek. Or if Nick said something, they'd go to Roy, and Roy would say, well, I'll go talk to him. But, whatever, so Nick was the heat guy. Yes, he did do things like he would bring in the Mexican wrestlers that didn't have paperwork even in the 50s and 60s, right? And they'd wrestle 2 or 3 times on some of those spot shows. Under Mass, the Red Menace and the Green Terror and all that stuff. Tennessee was horrible for prostituting the mass gimmick, horrendously. But Nick and Roy in the 70s, their promotional style was still the 40s. And in their territory, especially Chattanooga, Birmingham, and Nashville, it still worked because that's what people were educated to that was wrestling. It had been done the same way by the same people for over 35 years by the time that they were on a downhill slide, right? So the other territories looked down on Tennessee because they had evolved somewhat, and they didn't do we'll just take these two guys and stick a mask on them and give them 2 weeks of wins and then put them in a mass versus mass match or whatever. The Carolinas, they were Georgia, Eddie Graham, they all tried to be a little more dignified, right? But the Tennessee got that reputation because Nick and Roy were doing the shit like they'd done in the 40s when Pat Malone, the Green Shadow, sold out the fucking Hippodrome 86 times or whatever. It worked still with the fans. The point is, he would do that shit. And he would tell you, oh, boy, come in to work for me. You're going to be farting through silk. And then I remember one time the story was that one of the Mexican wrestlers come up to Nick and said, Mr. Nick, I cannot afford to feed my family on what you're paying me. He said, boy, it's not what you make, it's what you save. But that was one of his favorite. It's not what you make, it's what you save. But the guy would say, but Mr. Nick, I only make $40 last week, And but see, here's the thing also, it's romanticized and exaggerated over the years. Literally, Moolah probably started working for Nick Gulas and Roy Welch in a time when probably $5 was the guarantee because it was the late 40s or early 50s. But the girls, they always use the girls in Nashville in main events, so maybe they might have got 20 or 25. I don't know. Mildred Burke got considerably more, I'm sure. She wouldn't have been there. But you got to remember that all the old timers that had the biggest grudges against Nick, they all started there in that Tennessee territory when you'd get $5 or $10. But $5 or $10 equaled 40 or 50 and fucking 35 years later. So it's all relative. But no, Nick was notoriously cheap. He rubbed people the wrong way. He was a penny pincher, and he didn't like to pay the talent. And he used to even cuss the fans. Sometimes they'd say he'd stand out front in Nashville on a big house when the people were trying to get in. He'd go on, get in the door. Go on now, keep moving. To the fans. God damn it, boy, get in there. But at the same time, I mentioned Eddie, the visit I had with Eddie Marlin in Nashville not long ago for the NWA 70th when I was down there that weekend. And he talked about how that Jerry Jarrett is the one who actually, when Eddie was 40, Jerry Jarrett talked him into getting in the wrestling business full time. He had always kept a job at a rubber plant in Nashville and been a sheriff's deputy and done other things and wrestled part-time. That's why he'd never left the Tennessee territory. He had a wife and family and a house there and everything. But when he was already 40, Jerry Jarrett said, I think you can do better wrestling. And he made Eddie one of his top baby faces on his end of the territory, Memphis and Louisville and et cetera, and started having Eddie run some towns and promote. And Eddie ended up retiring from the rubber plant, and middle-aged, he was one of the top baby faces in the territory and making more money than he had in wrestling in the previous 25 years. But Eddie said that when he and Tommy Gilbert had that big run on top in 1973, 74, I said, what was the money like? Because, Nick was cheap. He said, well, yeah. He said, I said, what was one of your big weeks? He said, and he almost looked down, right? Like it's something to be ashamed of. He said, well, $750. And that doesn't, for them drawing all those people and everything, that still wasn't very good. And it was a Nick Gulas payoff. But then I've ran it through the calculating machine. That's like making $4,000 in today's money because you get a fucking motel for $8. The first motel I bought when I got into business in 1981, in Chattanooga was $19. So it's all relative, but people made money working for Nick, but they were the guys that were the Fargos, the Tojos, the guys that got over and stayed over and could always be counted on to draw money in that territory. And that's why they stayed there and didn't go a lot of other places. And that's why Nick took care of them because he was cheap, but he knew which side of his bread that his butter was located on.
Did Nick have a hand in the payoffs at all in Memphis, or was that all Jerry Jarrett after he started booking?
I think it was all. I think Jerry took care of his towns. I'm not sure to what the process was, but I think as long as Nick got the agreed upon cut of what the towns he was partner in. He didn't care whether the rest of it was, or how the rest of it was allocated. But I'm sure also that the payoffs probably went up a little bit when Jared had less unwanted partners. Well, there you have it. And there's one more. Can we go for one more?
One more.
Where is it? Okay. Yeah, I got this as an email. You say that it's so easy to get into business now, and I'm paraphrasing this because it's kind of long. But you say it's so easy to get in the wrestling business now. I've said used to it was like the mafia. You couldn't get in the wrestling business, but once you got in, you were made for life. And now, like any jackoff can do this, right? But the writer, who there is no name, just numbers. Say anyway. Isn't that because there are so many wrestling schools and anybody can train? Why do they accept them? Is it the wrestler's fault or the fault of the people who train them? And actually, this is a very good point. It's
interesting question.
If you are a fucking morbidly obese 400-pound middle-aged man, and suddenly the Dallas Cowboys say, okay, you can play, fucking tackle for us. Is it your fault or is it theirs? Well, it's partly your fault in going, I have no business in doing this and I'm going to embarrass myself, but technically it is the fault of the people. And I've mentioned this before on the show a couple of times. It's the fault of the people now, the lack of control that bookers have over their crews, promoters have over their shows. And everybody works for everybody, and it's all over the fucking place, and there's no structure, so anybody can pretty much get away with doing anything they want to fucking do, especially on the independent level. So, yes, I do blame some of the schools, and I don't know if we've talked about this, but maybe this is a good way to close. Maybe the sooner the better, the way this thing is headed. But I will admit that Ohio Valley Wrestling, which was a school that I'm most closely identified with and that I had an ownership stake in, Ohio Valley Wrestling has, in its history, at various times, trained some people that I probably, if I had been the sole decision maker, they would not have been. They would have been gracefully declined, right? Because part of it is financial. But then you can also make the case that at least they were getting taken care of and trained right, and nobody was going to get hurt or fucking fleeced. In that respect. But what I liked to do when I had most say, and especially in OVW camps when we had the WWE developmental program, or in the Ring of Honor seminars that we would do, that they're still doing to this day, and Hunter Delirious really enjoyed, because he enjoyed training guys and he enjoyed doing those, and Danny Davis always liked finding talent, and Rip Rogers, Rip has trained everybody, 8 to 80, blind, crippled, or crazy. If they can't walk, he'll drag them, because he just loves teaching wrestling. I've never seen anybody that just lives to teach wrestling like Rip Rogers. But what we would do in those seminars and tryouts that we would hold, for example, in OVW, where we found the Johnny Jeters and the Mark Magnuses and the Chris Cages and the Elijah Burks and the Jillian Halls and of the world, all the people who came on and got Matt Morgan. Well, no, they had Matt, but got contracts by coming to our tryout camps. We had a couple of different levels at OVW of training. There's an amateur class, which was for beginners. People had never been in the ring, get your feet wet, learn how not to break your neck, taking a bump, whatever. Intermediate was when, okay, you're ready to do spot shows and maybe some house shows, the church gym. I might not want to put you on TV unless it's in a dark match or doing a job, but you're starting to get in the program. And then the advanced class was all of the WWE contracted guys and all the guys that I thought were good enough performers that they could be featured on television and booked on all the house shows, at least all that they could make if they had second jobs. And what we would do to augment that is, instead of, at the time, you could sign up for the amateur class and I think train with Dinsmore at that time, if you were local. But to find major or better talent, we would do periodic seminars where you'd come in for a weekend. First one we did was for a week, which just wore everybody down. But we had 50 people at $1,000 a piece come in and spend a week in Louisville, and we put them up at the extended stay hotel, and we had them doing drills and classes, I think 3 or 4 days a week, which comprised interviews and, depending on their skill level, stuff in the ring. And then they saw our TV taping and they went to some of our house shows and they were acclimated to the program. But a lot of people weren't able to take a week off of work or out of their lives if they were aspiring wrestlers. So we started doing just weekends for a little bit less. But we would have, it was by, you could apply and then we accepted you. You couldn't just, okay, we've got 50 spots. The first 50 people that sent a fucking check, we're going to take them. I sat down and made a questionnaire. Your personal information, height, weight, age, where are you from, your occupation currently, what is your athletic background, high school, college, professional, if any. You know, we were looking for people of the age group, the size group, and the athletic ability and background that we could think would at least have a shot of contributing to our program on the air or getting a WWE deal. And as much as, you know, we weren't going to sit there and go through goddamn, 50 fucking videotapes of half an hour of this guy's shit. Give me this information and we're going to get back with you and we're going to accept your invitation or your application. And now you can send your money in and we'll save your spot. So it was an application deal where we didn't take everybody. I think we turned down the first time 200 and something. And but we had different turn down letters. One is, we frankly don't think due to your age or size or background or whatever that this is for you. And if you choose to continue with want to train wrestling, you should go elsewhere. People that were on the bubble that were like, well, I wish we had room for this because there's something to it. You know, he did this interesting thing, or he still looks like he's got pretty good size, or he's not that old. We would say, look, we're full, but we're going to do another one in 6 months. Please reapply. We want to hear back from you. And we ended up picking a couple of people up from that also. But the same thing with Ring of Honor. When we were looking for folks to be involved with the Sinclair program, we wanted to, it has to be a revenue generator because you have to pay the trainers to be there and you have to, sometimes hotels included in the package, sometimes it's not. But you have to feed them. So you got to make some money off the fucking thing. But it wasn't just about filling up the roster. I genuinely tried to. We did the same thing with applications and getting personal information because I wanted to find people that was realistic and credible. Because if you go to a wrestling school and you look around you and say, how the fuck did this fucking guy get in here? Then maybe you need to reevaluate where you are, because I've always thought that just because somebody can be trained to do this doesn't mean they should be allowed to, smartened up to, or be allowed to pursue it to possibly the detriment of their personal life or their fucking health or physical well-being. So that's what I always try to do. So yes, the answer to the question is a lot of the blame does go on the people that train them and the people that book them when they got no business. One guy in Eastern Kentucky, another reason why the commission has so many fucking screwy rules in the state of Kentucky, they actually licensed a guy that was legitimately in a wheelchair to be a fucking wrestling manager and then did a fucking angle in front of like 100 people in a fucking barn somewhere where they were turning him over and shit. And that was licensed by the state government, and they fucking heard about that. So now when you try to get you have to get a license in the state of Kentucky to go to wrestling school. You have to have a state athletic commission license to train. And not only that, but if the commissioner has not heard of you, never seen you, and doesn't have a qualified trainer vouching for you, they have to call you and ask you what the fuck you think you're doing before you get the license. So anyway, I recognize there's a weakness. There's a glitch in the matrix, but at least I did my part when I was involved with schools in a decision-making or training programs in a decision-making position to mitigate that somewhat, because I feel your pain and I recognize that.
There's a great Dory Funk Jr. quote, I think I've said it before here on the show, where he was asked, do you think it's too easy for someone to become a wrestler nowadays? And he said, well, it's not easy to be a well-paid wrestler.
Well, therein lies the problem. But, I just always thought that when you have a ton of guys in a training program, it's not fair to the guys that are really exceptional and really talented if your bottom half drags as bad as your top half is good. And so we always tried to make, especially OVW, as I said, Ring of Honor, we didn't have an ongoing training program when I was there, really. Just delirious with a few people, but not a set program. They were afraid of insurance liability, even though I gave them the same kind of fucking release that Vince McMahon's lawyers approved. Anyway, but in OVW, we would try to make sure that, okay, yeah, when we send guys out as representatives of our professional wrestling training program for newspaper or television appearances, news, whatever, public things, yeah, they got to look like athletes. They got to fucking, you have to have some type of image. And I always tried to keep that up with the guys. And we used some gimmicks in OVW. Trailer Park Trash was not a cosmetically appealing man, but because he had that unique little appeal that he had and the weird local charisma, and he bust his ass, he got over. But I didn't send Trash out on a lot of fucking, newscasts to represent the company either, just because people that weren't with the program might not get it.
Weird local charisma.
No, hey, when he would go to a goddamn over to U of L to a football game, there'd be 20,000 people in the stadium. And if it was a slow spot where people looked around and noticed he was there, he'd get a sizable Trailer Park Trash chant. When he was on USWA TV in the late 90s, right before they folded up. Weird local charisma. And then a lot of the people, when he took the police on that high-speed chase through downtown Portland neighborhood that time, and we had to unbook him for a little while because he went away to see friends in another part of the state. They actually worked for the state themselves that he was staying with. But it made some news. People knew who he was.
All right.
Actually, have I ever told that story? Just real briefly.
I've never heard it before until you just said it. Yeah.
They pulled Trash over, or tried to, at a roadblock down in his neighborhood, the Portland neighborhood of Louisville, one night. And he had not been drinking. And I believe him. But he got upset because they said, well, whether you have or, I believe this is the way it was, whether you have or not, we're going to stop you and give you the tests anyway. And he's like, well, you ain't stopping me. And he just took off. And they took off after him, and he knew the streets. He went up and down for quite a while in that part of town and people would gather on a street corner like, here he goes. He's going. That's Trailer Park Trash. Keep going, Trash. Run, Trash, run. And when they pulled him over, they weren't happy. So, but he was just, they insulted him. He said if they'd give him the test, he'd have passed it, but he was insulted by the fucking whole thing. Anyway, having said that, perhaps we'll close up for this edition. Have they learned anything about wrestling today, about the way that it used to work when all this shit worked and it was easy?
I sure hope they did.
Because I get people all the time. They think that, okay, somebody just went and signed contracts with all the wrestlers in all the different territories. And by the way, if there's 25 territories, a small territory, you got 16, 18 full-time guys. Big territory like the Carolinas or WWF, even in those days before Vince Jr., that ran 2 towns a night, you've got 40 guys in the territory. So you multiply that times 25, you've got, all you had to do was be one of the 500 or 600 best wrestlers in the business, and you could get a full-time spot pretty much anywhere. But a lot of people don't understand that it was just, you call, okay, come in. And if you get over, they keep you and they use you. And if you don't, they stop using you or they slow down on paying you and you call someplace else and find someplace to go. And sooner or later, if you're good, you get the breaks and a booker likes you or a couple like you and they want to use you in main event spots, then you worked your way up. Some guys made it, some guys didn't. Some guys, like I said, like to underestimate and some like to overestimate. And, a lot of people think it was the same thing then as it is now. We'll just go to wrestling school. There were no wrestling schools. You had to get trained by Herb Welch on his farm or Ric Flair in his fucking backyard because you deliver him 10 Bloody Marys at fucking 7:00 in the morning, or any of the other ways that guys managed to break in, some way or another with the established territories. And then you have to be trusted. But then it was a closed society. But once you were in it, you started being exposed to and involved with more people that could help you out. And that's back in the days where you basically, ran your own business. And if you decided you wanted to be a fucking Argentinian wild man who said, "Oh, yeah," and had the El Garfio claw hold because that fit you and that's what you could do, then when they booked you, Pampiro Firpo, they knew what they were getting. They were getting the wild bull of the Pampas, and that's the spot they wanted to fill. A fucking wild-ass guy, either as a babyface or a heel, that could fucking draw money against the Sheik or fucking whoever. And so they didn't just book you and say, well, now here's what your gimmick is going to be, and here's how you're going to talk, and blah, blah, blah. It was a simpler time.
A better time.
A simpler time and a better time, but we are out of time. How's that segue? Boom. I'm going to stop right there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all the feedback to JimCornette.com and Cornette's Collectibles on the Midnight Express 35th anniversary picture. As we said, remember those heavy cardstock Cult of Cornette membership certificates are still available. And by the way, if you order a certificate and a Midnight Express photo together, it doesn't charge any extra postage. I found that out too. So that's something to think about. But until next week, for the great Brian Last, who's lackluster when it comes to identifying the brothers Johnson, and for yours truly, Jim Cornette, but you did get Alan Parsons.
I did.
And for yours truly, Jim Cornette.
And I got brothers Johnson.
Well, you were lackluster, but you jumped in, you salvaged yourself. I'm trying to close this up. Thank you. Fuck you. Bye-bye, everybody.